again. As part of our coaching work, we're often contacted by people who are struggling with fatigue. And this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously the opposite in the Southern Hemisphere, is the time that these types of problems seem to manifest. Basically, the days are getting longer, the daylight hours are longer, we're getting a bit more enthusiastic, the weather's a bit warmer, so we're getting outside a bit more, and the temptation is to do more training volume, work a bit harder. When you're outside, you get real hills you have to work against. And also, if you've not managed to do much training when the weather's been bad, I know it's been really bad in the UK, then it's the time that people start to panic. And then when you panic, you might do too much. You might end up getting overtired. You might have to have a rest, start again, panic even more because you're even more behind where you want to be, etc., etc. And you end up getting more and more tired. And it's like potentially actually ending up in an overtraining syndrome. And of course, this fatigue means you're unable to train and make progress and enjoy the sport that you love or that you've chosen to do. What we're finding is actually that this situation is much more common than we thought at first thought. We thought it might be a bit of an isolated thing, but actually it seems to be very common, and perhaps driven also by the increasingly common use of apps like Zwift, Training Plans, Trainer Road, that are sort of focused on gaining some quick gains in fitness, gaining quick success, seeing results, because that's what keeps you motivated and keeps you on the app, rather than building a solid base. Anyway, these things are becoming increasingly common, and I thought it'd be worth doing a video on it and discussing how Claire and I approach the problems when we get them. It's often the most motivated and dedicated people with the strongest work ethics that get these problems, because the temptation is for these types, or our types, I'm sort of fit in that category, is to get the training done or push through, because there must be something wrong with you if you can't do it. And I've suffered from these types of symptoms myself, so I've got some first-hand experience to draw on, which I find quite useful in my coaching work. And even when things go well, the temptation is to push harder because you want to build more and more fitness. But you don't always have to work harder or do more to build fitness, because all you're trying to do is stress your body a little bit more than it's used to, and then it'll adapt and change and get fitter. So actually continuing the same level of training for several weeks, or even maybe a couple of months, will see you develop fitness. You'll develop fast at first, and then it'll gradually level off. But you don't have to be increasing all the time, because fatigue accumulates over time. So you accumulate some fatigue and then take some time to recover. Always trying to be faster, always trying to beat your Strava segment, always trying to work harder or more, just leads to problems. And when these problems occur, you can either try and force through, which a lot of people do, and that leads to more problems. You get more and more demoralized, and a lot of people just stop for a long period of time. And I said that in my last video, but it is a real problem, because you can become demotivated because you can't do what you think you should be able to do. So rather than take a step back and see what you can actually do, you just stop. Or when you do get going again, you try and jump in at the level you were at, or the level you think you should be at, or the level you need to be at, rather than the level that you actually are, and take your time to get back to fitness in a consistent, sustainable way. So these videos aren't about advertising, they're about helping people and helping people develop. So I'm not going to say that you need a coach to have an objective help or objective feedback, but having some objective professional help does make a huge difference. So if you are really struggling and you've tried over months and years to get better, then it might be worth getting in touch with a professional coach. And if you want to work with us, we'd love to work with you. We do provide things at varying levels. We have a lot of free support products, like our Facebook group, Facebook training discussion group, the Strava Club. You can post questions on there, you can put comments in the YouTube, or you can email me directly or fill in a contact form on the website with your questions, and we'll answer as quickly as we can in as detailed a way as we can to help you informally, or more formally if you want to work with us more formally. Then of course we've got our EBR clubs, our EBR cycling and running clubs, where we work together with the members of the club to help themselves. There's a lot more. It's a case of learning what works for you as an individual in the clubs and adjusting the plan that we provide to meet your personal needs. And we're here to help with that. And that's a really effective environment. And we're actually revamping the club offering to include 3 tiers to help people deal with this excessive fatigue that can happen. And then of course there's one-to-one coaching where you get everything that we can provide directly for you and specifically tailored for your needs. So the trick to getting fitter is what you do when things go wrong. You'll notice that I say when things go wrong, because nothing ever goes to plan. It's not if something goes wrong. You're never going to progress smoothly without any hiccups happening, without getting a cold, or if you do, you're incredibly lucky. It's what you do when these hurdles or blockers occur that determines whether your fitness is going to progress, stagnate, or get worse and worse, and even maybe lead to overtraining. So having a plan and how to deal with it in an objective way is what makes a big difference. If things do go wrong, backing off your training is often a good idea. Maybe having a few days off or a week off can also be a good idea. But I don't think stopping completely, unless you have a chronic overtraining problem, a chronic overtraining syndrome, stopping completely for several weeks is just often just perpetuates the situation, it perpetuates the cycle. So start for a few days until you start to feel a little bit better, and then start by getting back to basics. And I've been developing those thoughts a bit more in the terms of a 3-tier system. So tier 1 would be getting back to basics and establishing some sort of baseline that you know you can sustain, and you can always step back to that. So this is like the 5 5s and a 10 that I talked about in previous videos, like 5 35-minute rides or runs and 1 70-minute ride or run. I always assumed that I used to run at 7-minute miles, so that's why it's called 5 5s and a 10. Sorry if that's confusing. So it's basically 3 to 5 shorter sessions and 1 slightly longer session, and they don't have to be 35 minutes. They can be 30 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes. But of course, when you start, you don't want to do the long session because it's extra load. It might be too much for you. And once you've established this baseline that you can keep doing week on week without getting excessively tired, you'll notice that your fitness starts to build. You're starting to get naturally faster. You're starting to naturally want to do more. And at that point, you can move on to tier 2. And in tier 2, you still use the same sort of baseline, but you'd introduce a high intensity training session, an interval session. And also you might start to build the distance of your or the duration of your longer training session. So you'd have 2 what I might call harder sessions, 1 faster session and 1 longer session. And you would keep doing this tier 2 and progress it within the tier 2 to be doing, maybe include a medium intensity session, maybe a tempo session, and increase the overall volume, and maybe add some medium duration training sessions. So essentially you're moving towards a more structured training routine, a more normal training routine with maybe 3 harder sessions a week and increased volume. And once you've got this tier 2 level going, you can then, and it's sustainable, you're sort of working hard on some days and you're recovering between your harder sessions, and things are going really nicely, you're building fitness, but you're not on the limit. You can then move on to what we call tier 3 periodization, and in that period you're trying to work on your strengths and weaknesses that are specific to your event. And in tier 3 you'll be accumulating some fatigue week on week, so you probably you might want to use a 3 week on 1 week off schedule, or you might have to take a few days off every now and again, or you might be doing, if you're training for ultra endurance events like a lot of you are, then some weeks you have to start, you'd start the week with an easier few days to recover and make sure you're recovered. You won't be doing the same thing every week, whereas in tier 1 and tier 2 you're doing the same thing pretty much every week. But in tier 3 you're doing specific things to improve your fitness specifically for your goal events. So that might be a few days in a row if you're training for a bike packing event, or it might be an extra long ride if you're training for a long Audax, or it might actually be an event, a practice event or a stepping stone towards your main event. So in this period it's much more variable, and your training is specific to make gains in certain areas. If you need to improve your VO2 max, you do more VO2 max work. If you need to train your FTP, then you do more FTP type threshold work. And if things start to go wrong, then you can always step back to tier 2 or tier 1. More normally you would step back to tier 1 for a few weeks, or maybe after a big event you'd step back to tier 1 for a few weeks to get back to basics, start building up again and move through the tiers again. It seems like a good system. It's sort of what I have been doing naturally with the athletes that I coach, But I think formalising it in this type of structure is quite helpful, a helpful way to look at your training and a helpful way to deal with things if they don't go quite to plan. Obviously things might not be quite as clear cut, and it's sometimes hard to spot when things go wrong. But I think actually making it as clear cut as possible so that you actually do take a step back, a conscious step back in your training volume and get back to basics if things seem to be drifting the wrong way, is a good way to take stock. Take the helicopter view as we discussed last week, gain a bit more objectivity and then start to move forward again in the way that you need to. It's probably the quickest way to turn things around. And we're restructuring our EBR club plans to include this 3-tier system so you can jump in at any level, and it means that it works for more people more effectively, and I think that means we can help more people more effectively, at least I hope so. So let us know what you think, let us know your experience, whether you've used any of these ideas yourself, whether you think you might like to use some of these ideas yourself, and if we can help in any way, just make comments, join the Facebook group, join the Strava club, and let us know what we can do to help you. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.